Hello and welcome to the first of our industry analyst briefings brought to you in conjunction between Microsoft and Tech Data. The focus of this is to go through what's going on in Microsoft and what's been happening in Microsoft over the last 3 months, just give a bit of sense of where the strategy is heading and any other sort of major corporate announcements rather than going into individual product briefings. For those of you who have not met before, my name is Phil Clark. I'm an independent IT consultant working very closely with Tech Data to try and help them articulate what's going on in the industry from an agnostic perspective and try and bring to life some of the advisory services or some of the services that Tech Data can bring to the channel without biasing things around sales or other agendas. The objective of this session is really clear. It's really just to cover off sort of 4 or 5 main things. One is Microsoft's corporate strategy, so talk about any major mergers and acquisitions or other changes in their strategy that have happened in the last 3 months. Give a little overview of some key product announcements, just at a high level, not going into the minutiae. Talk about specific changes in channel incentives or any key promotions, just to make sure that people understand what's going on. And then give some general industry context to what's going on in Microsoft's announcement. The purpose is to allow partners to really react or try and get a slightly more strategic view of where they're taking their business, if they are a Microsoft partner and therefore just want to be informed by that. As I mentioned, I don't work for Tech Data, I'm an independent consultant, so you'll get independent and not sales related advice here, and the views that I express are of my own. You're only going to get key headlines. The whole point of this is to give you an overview of what's happened in 3 months in about 20 minutes, so there'll be headlines only, but I will dive into some of the context where appropriate, and we'll publish the PDF of this session after the event, so you can click on some of the links to give you a bit more information where you think is appropriate. So diving straight in, I thought a good place to start would be to get a clear view of Microsoft's share performance. Now, the chart here, obviously quite busy, is a financial view of what's happened in the last 3 months in regard to the markets. And most people are aware there's a lot of turbulence in the markets for a whole raft of reasons at the moment, primarily being driven by the Ukraine war. But you can see here that from Microsoft's perspective, they have dropped, which is the blue line, apologies, they've dropped about 9%. Between the start of the calendar year and the end of March. And whereas that sounds a bit dramatic, just to give you a bit of context, I've overlaid Google and Amazon. Amazon and Google both, who I would perceive as their primary competitors, dropped by 3 or 4% each. And the overall NASDAQ, which is obviously the index of major tech companies, dropped by 15%. So Microsoft isn't faring too badly, but slightly behind its competitors. But if you follow the lines, you'll see that there's quite a lot of volatility around all of the lines, and especially with sort of Amazon and Google, there's some quite big swings with regards to different things that are going on in the markets, and that's, I think, a fair indication that some of these share price discussions are a little bit academic, especially in the context of the macroeconomic changes. But fundamentally, Microsoft down over the quarter, one to watch in terms of share price performance. I thought it'd be useful just to give you a little sense of where we are today versus where we were 5 years ago. Microsoft's share price is now about $308 as of today, which is the 31st of March. About 12 months ago, it was about $224. So they've still seen something in the region of 36% share price growth or market value in 12 months, and something in the region of 373% growth in 5 years. So it gives you an indication of Microsoft and the broader tech sector still very well perceived by the markets, and certainly a share to keep an eye on. The other point on this chart is I've pointed out where Microsoft 2Q results were published. They're actually published on the 25th of January, and you'll see an uptick in the market price from there. Now, that might have been associated with a bit of good news associated with the war, but fundamentally, I think the market would have been a bit more overt if there were any downsides to what was being announced by Microsoft in their results. And moving on to the next slide, it gets into a bit more detail about those results. And once again, Microsoft's results, financial results for Q2, which takes them to the end of December 2021, absolutely incredible performance. It's really quite interesting looking at the different companies in the sector and understanding growth figures and profitability, and Microsoft just continue to publish amazing results. So 20% growth year on year, up to around about 51 billion of revenue in quarter in FY 2022. The thing that amazed me is their bookings are up substantially, by about 32%. So they've got an order book that takes them out for a number of years. And their cloud figures, also showing substantial growth. And we'll talk about this later on. I think the interesting market comparison we should start doing is market share. And realistically, I believe the Microsoft are actually now starting to encroach on AWS's market dominance of the cloud market. If you look on a data center to data center perspective, if you include Microsoft 365, I think Microsoft are clearly one of the market leaders in cloud overall. But there's a lot of growth going on in Microsoft Azure, and that's starting to eat into AWS, as demonstrated by a substantial growth return. The other point that came out of the financial results is that they've got $72 billion of cash in the bank. Now, clearly that's a good thing, and it gives them a war chest to make acquisitions. They announced a few months ago that they were going to be acquiring Activision Blizzard, which is a gaming company, for about $67 billion. So it's probably one to watch, because this could be quite a big acquisition, or it is a big acquisition, but it might impact the cash line a little bit heavily. So although no one's predicting any major issues associated with the acquisition from a cash perspective, I think it will dilute Microsoft's war chest with regards to its ability to make further acquisitions of that size and scale. And that brings me on to sort of some of the main corporate news items. You can see here, what I tend to do is just extract the key things that are going on in the Microsoft world. Excuse me. And obviously there's some major acquisitions going on. The Activision merger with Activision Blizzard merger was announced probably a couple of months ago. It's one of the biggest acquisitions Microsoft have ever done, and it's a major strategic move for them. There is a big driver, I believe, from Microsoft to support their metaverse strategy. And by beefing up gaming and some of the technologies that Activision bring, it gives them a really interesting insight into what goes on with regards to virtual worlds and some of the high-end graphics piece, which is a really clever move from my perspective. They are having a few issues with the merger, though, interestingly. Activision Blizzard were going through some court cases associated with some HR issues they had, and I think Microsoft are getting dragged into that, and so the merger hasn't actually been approved yet by Congress, and that's one to watch. In real terms, is it going to get turned over? No one really knows, but I think Microsoft need to make sure they deal with these really quickly, because some of the accusations that are being filed at Activision for previous conduct probably isn't the sort of thing that Microsoft would want to be associated with. So you can click on the link here. It'll give you a little insight as to what's going on with the Activision merger from an approvals perspective. There was also an announcement earlier on today about the acquisition of a company called Minute. They perform process mining, so they are very, very good at graphically representing business process flows and identifying improvements in those process flows to support business process improvement. Now, clearly, Microsoft have a strong story around automation, and I think the merger or the joining up of Minute and Microsoft's automation stories will drive some really interesting results with regards to process automation and process improvements as a result of their AI technologies, but also some of the process mapping that Minute brings. So again, one to watch. Be interested to see how they amalgamate these products into the overall portfolio, but I think that the process mapping side of things very, very strong in Minute terms, and be interested to see how they develop those products. And the other piece of corporate news, I think the Nuance acquisition was actually announced about a year ago, but it's actually gone through now. So they are now one organisation. It's all been approved. That concluded around about 2-3 weeks ago. So the Nuance acquisition has now been bedded in, and it's now incumbent upon Microsoft to make sure they make the most out of that acquisition within the voice platform and healthcare sort of sectors that Nuance were particularly strong in. It's also a little ditty into the metaverse side of things, and it's quite an interesting play by Microsoft. Clearly Meta, aka Facebook, have stolen the march with regards to brand association of the metaverse, but it's no big secret that all of the major IT companies are developing metaverses of their own right. Apple have got a big story, and Microsoft have got a big story as well. And I think in real terms, although Facebook and metaverse Facebook is driving the metaverse agenda, I think Microsoft, when they come out of the blocks, will come out strongly. And this blog that has been published by the corporate PR team is their first sort of foray really into some of the considerations you might want to think about with regards to securing the metaverse. And clearly they're trying to position themselves as the secure version of the metaverse, as opposed to some of their competitors who have had some issues with data, etc. in the past. So it's an interesting play by Microsoft, and I think it sets out strategically how Microsoft are intending to compete in this metaverse world, probably focusing around security, privacy, data control, and creating a safe place for people to go and live their virtual lives. A couple of other things as well came out of the corporate announcements. One is there was a lot of focus about some energy case studies, and Microsoft, as you're probably aware, are very, very focused on sustainability and net zero. So a lot of the corporate PR that gets published is associated with them trying to be a better company and a very much green company. Their energy case study actually talks about the way that some of the Microsoft Cloud products are used to drive improvements in energy development. And so that's sort of interesting reading if you're in that space. And they've also given a publication a year on as to how they're getting on their 2030 sustainability commitments. It's quite an honest review, and I think basically Microsoft is saying that all of the early stages of their process to get to completely net zero by 2030 has started quite slowly because they're building the program, but they can see that over the course of the time they're still on track to hit the 2030 commitments they've made. So good news with regards to net zero, and further beefs up Microsoft's branding to support what they're trying to do commercially and strategically. Few little notices on product announcements. Interestingly, very quiet this quarter for Microsoft. They're usually a lot more prominent with regards to product announcements. But Azure have announced some new platform changes to improve cost management and billing, so actually give you a slightly more a better experience around the cost management and billing aspect of the cloud platform. They've expanded out on some of the Azure front door pieces, so to actually help out with some of the integrations between different platforms. And they've also driven out some security, very hot topic in the industry generally, API management. And so they've announced a product called Private Link, which allows different API services to connect in a secure and encrypted way. So some quite interesting things going on in the Azure world, but these are the only ones really that were announced that were major announcements. And so it shows that it's quite a quiet month. In devices terms, even less going on. The major announcement I could see was really associated with some new Surface hubs. Very good looking things, but probably more designed for the major offices and the people with significantly deep pockets, so maybe not a mass volume product. In Microsoft 365, again, pretty sparse with regards to major product announcements. There's an interesting blog around Microsoft Teams and Microsoft 365 and how it's been adopted on a broad basis to support home working. So the hybrid working expectations is a blog really just talking about different features and functions that Teams and 365 has delivered as a result of a lot of the move to a slightly different workforce configuration. And then there's a couple of other things around Windows, again continuing insider preview builds for Windows 11, so lots of new versions of that to be taken out for those of you in the insider program. And they're announcing, or they're continuing with the announcement of the death of Internet Explorer by giving Microsoft Edge an IE mode, which if some people really like Internet Explorer, then that's clearly a good thing. But I think it's clearly the beginning of the end for Internet Explorer overall. Partner program changes are the big news for Microsoft. So there's sort of two main things that have been going on. Most of you will be aware that New Commerce Experience, or NCE, has been bubbling around for about 6 months now and hasn't been the slickest of programs, but it's now pretty much done, subject to a few little final changes in the program over the next few months. We'll be in a position now where NCE will be behind us and it'll be the norm. Legacy contracts, I think, can run till the end of this calendar year, till December. And there are some pricing changes to be aware of over June period just to make sure that you're not out of pocket as a result of some of your legacy contracts. But anyone who's moved to NCE now, hopefully the worst of it is behind you. The next thing to look forward to is a change in the overall partner program. And Microsoft announced probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago that they're changing the Microsoft Partner Network to the Microsoft Cloud Partner Program. And although that sounds very similar and it's just a name change, it's not just a name change. There's quite a few fundamental things that are coming up that has had some mixed feedback in the partner community. 6 solution areas, pretty standard, look very similar to the MPN ones. So you've got data, infrastructure, digital business apps, modern work and security. And the intention is that partners will secure partner credentials in each of those areas based on a capability score. So no longer will there be gold and silver portfolios, but this is more about a partner will be marked in accordance with its score, which will be a combination of sales performance, a combination of trained engineers or trained salespeople, and a few other things, just to give the partner a competitive edge around the investments they're making in support of Microsoft's partner program. Now, we'll be probably doing all sorts of coverage of this over the next few weeks as it becomes more prominent, and so I think, hopefully watch this space to get into the detail of what you need to do. The actual changes don't really take effect until October 2022, so we've got a bit of time to sort it out, and hopefully they've learned the lesson of how NCE went. We'll try and get ourselves ahead of the game and provide as much information as we can to support a smooth migration to Microsoft Cloud Partner Program, as opposed to what happened with NCE. Just a little bit of industry context. I think one of the things I found most interesting over the last few weeks is Statista have published a forecast market share for the cloud market, and you'll see on the left hand side of the chart, although it's not material and the lines look very similar, you can see the Azure market share is growing fairly aggressively in the context of a multi-$100 billion market. So over the course of 2020 to 2021, Microsoft grew by about 1%. And over the course of 21 to 22, looks like it will grow by another 1% or so. So Amazon are sort of losing their momentum a little bit. I'm sure they'll get it back, and I'm sure we'll continue to have decent scraps around the cloud market share figures. But fundamentally, I think this is good news for Microsoft, because generally people are forecasting that Azure is starting to eat into AWS's lunch, and long may it continue. I think there's some other things which you can click on the links here with regards to reactions to the new cloud partner program. There's some really interesting press around different partners' reactions based on what they know, and I think the general sentiment is not another change, which I'm hoping is going to be fairly minimal, but we just don't know just yet. NCE, I think, has damaged Microsoft's credibility in terms of managing these sort of major program changes. So they need to be really careful about how they manage this cloud partner program approach. But if you read past all the negativity, there probably are some benefits in there. And if you are a well-qualified partner who's doing incredibly well with regards to sales, you probably will be rated above others who have just had historical gold or silver competencies for years. So it'd be interesting to see how that washes through once we get a bit more detail. And a final bit of industry context: Gartner have awarded Microsoft the leader position in analytics and BI. I think that's the 15th consecutive year they've been there. So it'd be interesting to see if that'll ever change. And certainly, obviously Microsoft are very strong with regards to Power BI, and it's largely, I think, driven by the fact that Power BI is such a prominent BI platform now, by comparison to some of the older or cloud-based ones that are around. So interesting to watch. I think as Microsoft develop their analytics and BI platforms, be interesting to see if anyone else is catching up with them, and whether they continue with their market leading position. So that's sort of a summary of where we are on the Microsoft quarterly performance. As I said, a fairly light news for month, a quarter for news. But hopefully, that gives you an insight of roughly what's going on. If there's any particular points you want us to make or things you want us to expand upon, please do get in touch on csp@techdata.co.uk, or just drop me an email, phil.clark@embedded-it.co.uk, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next quarter. Hopefully we'll have more news to talk about in terms of the roundup. Cheers.